Hello, and welcome back to the True Story channel. And thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us here. Tonight I want to tell you a story that begins with a simple family dinner and ends with a question that quietly changed everything. Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by family, listening to everyone talk about the future of the family name, and suddenly realized your place in that future might be missing? That was the feeling creeping through my chest that night. If you stay with this story until the very end, I promise you will understand something deeper about family, about pride, and about the quiet moments when a single decision reshapes the meaning of legacy. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life I have been the daughter who chose a different road. My sister Sophia followed the expected path inside our father's construction company. The kind of path that builds tall glass buildings and headlines. I chose something quieter, designing small community spaces in Seattle, places meant for people who are usually overlooked. For years I told myself that difference did not matter. Families grow in many directions, or at least that is what I wanted to believe. The restaurant where it happened overlooked the dark water of San Diego Harbor, its tall windows reflecting rows of quiet boats rocking gently in the night tide. Crystal glasses caught the warm golden light, and every chair around the table seemed arranged for celebration. We were there to celebrate Sophia, whose work had transformed my father's company into something bigger than he once imagined. When my father lifted his glass, pride shining in his eyes, the room leaned closer to listen. What he said next sounded like praise, but the words landed like a door quietly closing. My son Lucas heard it too, long before anyone else noticed the silence spreading across the table. The kind of silence that warns you something in the family story has just shifted. And in that moment I realized the question my son would ask next might change not only the dinner, but the future of our family forever, in ways none of us were prepared to face. That night together, at that quiet, shining table beside the harbor lights, outside the glass windows of that restaurant, where everything truly began that evening. Have you ever realized that silence inside a family can teach lessons just as loudly as words? That thought settled in my mind the moment Lucas whispered his question across the table. The celebration continued around us, glasses clinking softly, polite laughter drifting through the room, but something had already shifted. In that instant, I understood that the story my father believed about our family had never really included me. For years, I had convinced myself that this didn't matter. After graduating with a degree in architecture, my father assumed I would return home and join Carter Development. In his world, it wasn't even a question. My sister Sophia had stepped naturally into that role, expanding the company, growing it into something larger than the modest business he began decades ago with a truck and a toolbox. That path made sense to everyone except me. I moved to Seattle instead. My office sat above a narrow brick storefront on a quiet street where buses rattled the windows in the afternoon and rain tapped gently against the glass. It was small, sometimes uncertain work, designing community spaces, sustainable homes, projects meant for neighborhoods developers rarely noticed. My father always listened politely when I described a project. Then he would smile in the careful way people do when they don't quite understand. Interesting work, he would say. Not real construction, not real business. At family dinners, the contrast was impossible to miss. Sophia spoke about towers of glass and steel, city blocks under development, investors and contracts worth more than my entire studio might see in years. When the conversation turned toward me, my father asked the same gentle question every time. So, how's your little design studio doing? I learned to answer briefly. I learned to smile. Arguing would have felt like trying to change the direction of the tide. Eventually, I accepted that in the Carter family story, I was simply the branch that grew away from the main trunk. But that night, as my father continued describing the future, how Sophia's children might one day run construction sites, how the Carter name would stand on buildings long after we were gone, I noticed Lucas beside me. His fingers tightened around his water glass until the knuckles paled. That small gesture carried more truth than anything spoken aloud. In my father's voice, legacy sounded like a single road stretching forward. My old instinct returned immediately. Stay quiet, don't disrupt the celebration, don't embarrass anyone. I had followed that rule for years, but when I glanced at Lucas again, I understood something I had ignored for far too long. Silence would teach him exactly where he belonged in this story. Slowly, without planning it, I pushed my chair back and stood. The conversations around the table faded into a curious hush. What if the meaning of legacy had been wrong all along? The question moved through my mind as I stood beside the table, holding my glass while every pair of eyes slowly turned toward me. My father still wore the satisfied smile of a man certain the evening was unfolding exactly as planned. He believed I was about to raise a toast to Sophia. In a way, he wasn't wrong. I lifted the glass slightly. To legacy, I said. The word floated in the air for a moment, familiar and comfortable to everyone in the room. A few guests nodded politely. Someone tapped their glass in quiet agreement. Then I continued. I've been thinking about that word a lot lately. The room began to settle into silence. Legacy, I repeated carefully, is a strange thing. Everyone talks about it, but very few people ever ask who gets to define it. A subtle shift passed across the table. My sister lowered her wine glass. My father's smile tightened slightly, the way it does when curiosity replaces certainty. I kept my voice calm. Last month, I filed paperwork to create something called the Carter Design Fellowship Trust. The words landed softly but firmly, like stones placed one by one into still water. A ripple of silence spread outward. I explained that the trust would fund apprenticeships and scholarships for first-generation students entering architecture and skilled trades, young people who had the talent but not the connections. People like the apprentices my father once worked beside, long before the company grew into what it is today. I paused only briefly before continuing. The trust is already funded, the legal structure is complete, and it's designed to continue long after I'm gone. That was the moment the room became completely still. No forks moved. No glasses touched the table. I've also named Lucas as successor trustee. My father blinked. Sophia's husband slowly set his fork down beside his plate. Outside the tall windows, the harbor lights shimmered across the dark water, steady and distant. I gestured lightly toward the view. Compared to Carter Development, it's small, I admitted. Compared to the projects everyone talks about tonight, it probably looks insignificant. Then I finished the thought. But it's ours, and it's permanent. No one reacted immediately. There was no applause, no confrontation, just a quiet recalculation moving through the room like a change in the tide. I lowered my glass and sat back down. The air felt different now, as if the story everyone believed about our family had suddenly gained a second chapter. What happens after a quiet declaration changes the direction of a family story? The answer, I discovered that night, is rarely dramatic. The world does not stop. Conversations continue. Plates arrive. Yet something invisible shifts, like a hidden door opening somewhere inside the house of memory. When I sat down, the server stepped into the room carrying the next course. Unaware, she had walked into a silence that hadn't existed a few minutes earlier. Sophia resumed, describing a new expansion project in Phoenix, her voice steady but softer than before. My father listened, nodding occasionally, though every so often his gaze drifted toward me, as if he were rearranging a narrative he had believed for decades. After dessert, he approached quietly. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" he asked, not with anger, but with the careful curiosity of someone encountering an unfamiliar map. I held his gaze and answered simply, "I just did." Outside the restaurant, the harbor wind moved across the dark water, and the boats rocked gently against their ropes, restrained but never still. On the drive home, Lucas watched the passing lights through the car window for a long time before speaking. "You didn't have to do that tonight," he said. I shook my head. "I didn't do it tonight," I told him. "I did it last month." He considered that quietly, then asked the question that mattered most. "So, I'm part of something?" I smiled in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "You always were," I said. "Now it simply has paperwork." In the weeks that followed, there were no arguments, only small adjustments. Sophia sent a brief congratulatory email. My father asked for a copy of the trust documents, and Lucas sat beside me, reviewing the first scholarship applications, signing his name beneath mine as successor trustee. No audience, no applause, just a beginning. Thank you for listening tonight, because the truth is, this story may only be starting.